metaphysics.
Hmm.
All right, man. Well, it's good to talk to you, and I'm curious about how we might want to proceed today and watch the dialogue, I'm sure. I have some ideas, but would be welcome to hear yours too.
Well, I'm always thinking about um, Brendan Graham Dempsey's
Yeah.
project and the sorts of conversations that he's having, um, both in the broader domain of metamodern spirituality, but metamodern Christianity in particular, which I think really raises the stakes a bit in the sense that, at least in, you know, the US and Europe, where we have these forms of spirituality that maybe inherit some from Buddhism and these more Eastern flavors of um, spirituality, where, I mean, there's a lot of critique of what's called Buddhist modernism, where, what became popularized in the US and Europe as Buddhism is actually a product of the colonial encounter, and it's Buddhism stripped of all of its cultural and cosmological and ritual baggage, and
Right.
only bringing along the practices and the sort of mind science and the um, kind of aspects of it that could be easily appropriated by a more or less materialistic culture,
Hmm.
um, for our well-being or mental health or mindfulness practice as a way of just being a less anxious, depressed uh, person, even though there's some evidence that meditating can at least initially increase your anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
But I think with Christianity, it's way more difficult to leave behind the cosmological, the ritual, the aspects that we would want to say are in the cultural domain, than it might be with some of the way that these Eastern traditions have been imported into the West. And so the metaphysical questions become way more interesting. And I think Brendan has been doing really amazing work challenging a kind of biblical literalism, and at least challenging um, any understanding of the Christ event, let's say, that would require miracles or something that would break with our contemporary scientific understanding of the way that the universe works. And I feel, at least in Brendan's way of framing what might count as a meta modern Christianity, I feel a little bit um, short of breath, let's say. There's not enough air in there for me to breathe comfortably. I don't want to import anything um, like that's directly in conflict with, our scientific understanding. But at the same time, I think there are other lenses through which to look at uh, Christianity and the sorts of events depicted in the Bible that can take them seriously and even grant them a certain kind of reality that wouldn't need to be in conflict with our at least post-reductionistic understanding of science. And so I just lay that all out on the
Yeah.
table because I've been really um, brought into a deep consideration of these questions by,
Yeah.
again, the great work that Brendan is doing, and I know you have too. And I think in our
Yeah.
first two sessions, um, we were doing we were engaging at a very esoteric, refined level of inquiry, and you drawing on some of the raw material and me bringing in a little bit of Steiner here and there, um, and I think that was quite productive and interesting, and I think we got some good responses from
Yeah.
people. Um, and so I don't know. I wanted us
Yeah.
to try to
I love
stay
it.
in this context, but I'm happy to
Yes.
hear whatever direction you want to take things into.
I think there's room to talk about esoteric. And it's for me, the way I think about it is if someone rich gave 100 people brand new Lamborghinis, um, here's the keys. Probably 99 of 99 people would take the keys and get in the car and be like, man, this is awesome, and have this experience of driving it. But I bet you would there at least be one person that would say, wait, before I turn the key on, I'm going to open up the hood. I'm going to figure out how this stuff works. This is kick ass, man. And like, let's be drawn to the intricacies of how it all, the gestalt of it all and all the parts, you know? So there's a place to talk about that. I see that you agree with the following, because I've just heard you talking this way, is the exoteric has to match with the esoteric, and the
Mm.
esoteric, if it's true, it has to be absolutely congruent with some kind of exoteric manifestation. It may not be fully realized at the exoteric, but really they feed off each other too, you know? And so I think that today, talking about this muse that you have, and I share, I love, for me, what, and I actually had a talk with Brennan about this, and I told him, I just really thank you for bringing the discussions. Other people have too, but it seems to be a vocation of his,
Mhm.
and I honor that. Um, it's a perplexity that he's being honest about. He's not being supercilious. There's a sense he's really grappling, and he's willing to grapple, and he's willing to show that he's grappling, you know, with these things. But I'm going to be honest too, is I've not been able to fully, in the grappling that he's given, and if that is a prehension that I'm prehending inside, you know, and trying to figure out what my own is, I'd like to pull on some ingress, some nice eternal objects here, and bring them in, because what I feel, the metamodern, as he's discussing it, doesn't have a penis or a vagina in some ways,
Uh-huh.
to be
Yeah.
clinical. No, just kidding. That, but I'm not sure if that's his role. I almost feel, I mean, maybe he's a Enneagram type 5. He said he kind of might move in that direction. Um, Everybody has a role. Everybody has a perspective on how to understand these in an energy, this one body, you know, this one big body of, we call it body of Christ, body of the Logos. And maybe his role is to bring start the conceptual vortex to bring this. But there needs to also be, you know, if this is a Taurus, you know, a star of David, and he's bringing the energetic vortex conceptual, it needs to be matched in a sense, uh, with an incarnative way
Mm.
to understand a praxis, you
Mhm.
know. And one of the things that I feel might be important to include in this is ritual. This is just my opinion, and I'm going to be honest, I'm Catholic. Grew up Catholic, grew up with this really, really rich, deep, universal kind of way to understand stuff. And I understand a lot of people didn't. For some reason, it hit me like when I received the body of Christ, even when I was in second grade when I received it. It wasn't just what a lot of second graders think. You just got to go through it. But there was this real organic, I thou, me meeting a transcendent and a connection and a consummation. I wouldn't be able to use those words, but that was kind of a feeling that I had. So what I would say is the rituals that we do, uh, that Christianity has, even even as Christianity has appropriated a lot of stuff from other religions, I don't. There's a way to see that as colonization, and there's a way to see that as empire coming over and conquering and taking. And but there's also a way, I think, to see that this is the third density humanity. This is our embodiment of laying out tracks, railroad tracks in subtle realms that, to be white-heading about it, uh, creates the geometric strains, um,
Mhm.
that the more that we are repeat the rituals and in greater numbers and all of this, that there's a cosmic law that two or more are gathered, then it increases the efficacy and the power of and the strength and the polishedness of that rail in the subtle realms over and over and over again. So these geometric strains that, yeah, there's a lot of nicks and crannies and things coming in, but if you look at the perennial geometric strain all the way through, and rituals helping to build these and reinforce them and polish them, then I think we need to honor the rituals, because without them, there's no rails and the train's not going anywhere. How do you feel about something like these things?
I think ritual is essential, and there's a certain way of understanding ritual, again, literalistically, and then understanding it symbolically. And actually, I would want to find a third way that's not uh, either of those options, but that maybe let's call it an active reading of ritual. And so it would look something like this. Um, the point is not, is it really true that we are all um, sort of members within the body of Christ?
Mm-hmm.
The point is not to ask if that proposition is true or false. For me, it's, well, how is it true? And ritual, the performance makes it sound like you're just pretending, but I don't mean in that sense. I just
Yeah.
mean it's something that you do, something you engage in, it's something that you enact, and in a communal context, it transforms your consciousness. And there's a certain mode of consciousness wherein the wine and the wafers do become the blood and the flesh. And I think it's we're already down the wrong track if we start asking, well, that's a metaphor, or
Yeah.
you don't mean that literally. What I think ritual is an enactive process that we engage in. And it's very easy to take a sort of modern anthropological view and look at the ways that cultures engage in rituals and think it's kind of silly that, like, some cultures might think, oh, if we didn't perform this, if we didn't worship the sun in this way, then it might not rise tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh, but if you if you if you think about ritual as inactive in a deeper sense, that whenever not engaging in ritual practice, even the modern secular world is replete with ritual, which is just certain habitual behaviors that we engage in because we find them meaningful. We don't even think about the fact that we're
Yeah.
doing ritual. Um, but it brings forth a certain kind of world.
Yeah.
And if we engage in the types of rituals that are predicated upon the belief that the world is a kind of complicated machine and we are ourselves kind of complicated machines over generations, that does have an effect on the world. And maybe we can't yet reach as far as this as uh you know stopping the rotation of the earth so the sun doesn't rise anymore, but we can certainly tear to shreds the fabric of life on the planet if we're not in ritual synchronization with the rhythms of that living planet. And so
Yeah. You write about the imaginal world.
mhm,
Cynthia Bourgeault writes certainly Steiner talks about this. The esoterics talk about the imaginal world, not as imagination in terms of like fantasy, but that it's God incarnating as us, but then we co-create, we color the the palette with our own art, and doing that over and over again is kind of evoking our imaginal capacities, to create real things also. So what I'm wondering, I want to ask you this question. This is a Whiteheadian question, but it's along the lines of what we're talking about. I'd asked you before in Facebook that I'd wondered, when you have two actual occasions and then they have a relationship, um, and my question is, could that relationship, what would that relationship look like if you have these two actual occasions that kind of come together, in a sense, two people coming together, and there's this relationship that forms? Is that an actual occasion? maybe I don't remember how I phrased it, but your response was something like, well, it would be like a lot of nexus. There would be some nexes going on in between these two, that and the propositional or solidarity growing together. And but my wondering is that could a nexus grow to a relationship grow to a point where it becomes its own sentient being that wants to grow as well, that's dependent upon the two but also interdependent too, that there's it's not embodied in the sense of this physical body here, but nevertheless it's physically embodied uh, in maybe the subtle dimensions, but nonetheless very real, and it has its own sentience, desire to concress, prehending, all of this. What do you I don't know, what do you think?
So a few things. Um, I think it's important to remember that for Whitehead, contemporary actual occasions concress in causal independence of one another. So um, there's a finite speed, let's say, of causality, or in Einstein's framework, is finite speed of light. Contemporary actual occasions can't affect one another immediately in terms of their physical prehensions of one another. Um, and so when two human beings come into they're engaging in deep conversation with each other, there's a sort of circular, reciprocality that begins, and then we are sharing a nexus. We're beginning to share a historical root of becoming, and the more intimately we are attending to one another, the more we begin to actually, I think, concress together and share in what Whitehead would call unison of becoming. And so, as another process thinker, Charles Saunders Peirce, would put it, like, when I'm deeply immersed in conversation with a close friend of mine for whom I feel a great deal of affection for, am I not just as much in his brain as I am in my own?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very Whiteheadian, process relational thing to say. And so, um, but Whitehead's trying to hold the tension between the solitude of human experience and the solidarity of human experience. Um, there's a moment of privacy in a concrescence of subjective immediacy that's
Mm-hmm.
mine and mine alone. But as soon as I achieve that perspective, it perishes and becomes public. It's shared with every occasion in my vicinity, and eventually with the entirety of the universe, as that effect of what I've just experienced perishing into objective immortality, right? So subjective immediacy is private, objective immortality is public, and it kind of propagates out through the whole nexus of occasions composing the universe. Um, but these categories of concrescence, actual entity, and so on are not they're meant to apply at any scale. And so there's no reason we can't think of a um, a church community engaged in the ritual of Eucharist as uh, an actual occasion, right? And think of, just for the purposes of thinking about the relationship that they're on, that those people are engaged in, that each person's experience is kind of, in the context of that ritual, is like akin to a prehension that's growing together towards this satisfaction, towards this concrescence, which would achieve the transubstantiation.
That's right.
um, and so we don't want to think of, some people get into Whitehead and think that an actual occasion is some kind of little quantum event, and that
Yeah.
builds up to our kind of consciousness. And that's not the way that Whitehead would want us to employ these categories. Um, we can we can apply them more flexibly than that.
Mm-hmm.
And the test for where and when we can apply them is just, well, does this elucidate what's going on? Does this provide us with a helpful language to get at what matters to us when we're
Mm.
seeking an account of something? And you mentioned the Lamborghini, and some people want to just drive it, and other people want to know what's going on under the hood, and that's a point that Owen Barfield makes
Oh.
about the difference between dashboard knowledge,
Hmm.
where you know what happens if you push this button, you push the brake, you push the gas, you turn the wheel, you know what the effect is. Um, but there's a different kind of knowledge, which you would call engine knowledge, which is you lift the hood and you see how what's actually going on to cause this to happen.
Yeah.
You can have an instrumental knowledge of, if I push here, then this is the effect without knowing anything about what's going on under the hood, right? And so I think metaphysics is a deeper form of exploration into what's going on under the hood. And that's what Whitehead's offering us with concrescence and his whole account of that process. Whereas usually science is engaged in dashboard knowledge because it wants to predict and control. And models that are rooted in that prediction control paradigm, they don't need to know what's really going on behind uh, under the hood. Those are metaphysical questions, and some of us want to know the answers to those questions. And I think when you start to get into the whole science religion conversation, it's very important, um, essential, really, to begin to ask those kinds of questions. So,
So, Matt, here's a question I have for you, related to what you're just saying and bringing it back to metamodern Christianity. Is can the consequent nature of God, I'm going to try to word this correctly, and if I don't get it right, I may try to reword it. But can the consequent nature of God, um, and all of what that means in terms of taking it up in God's self and harmonizing, is there a way that God can take what we might do as the fallacy of concrete, the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, that we humans may not even know we're making that fallacy, but somehow God will take, even our practice of a ritual, say, thinking it's an end of it in of itself, but in mercy and grace and different kinds of things, um, erase that fallacy and let it come through all the way through. Here's what I'm trying to say, I guess, is, uh, when we talk about ritual, a Jesuit priest, uh, academic, professor of mine back in Boston College said, if something is always and everywhere true, then it must be acknowledged and celebrated in one place at one time. And he was talking about that as being a ritual, particularly a sacrament. Sacrament meaning to make holy, to witness the holiness of something. So if something is always and everywhere true, if God is incarnating in matter, and that is always and everywhere true, then it needs to be brought to a crescendo where everybody who's a part of this mystery is able to see in kind of a cosmic mirror, but a particularity. Uh, and so rituals, on one hand, can be our embodied way to respond to this inchoate, unconscious almost instinct to, um, almost embody and somehow make apparent in our world what is always and everywhere true. So that might be a way in which rituals are, at first, attempts to make concrete that which is always and everywhere true. And that wouldn't be a fallacy of misplaced concreteness. However, you also get a lot of people who then repeat rituals and do rituals for maybe even mixed intentions. But they're doing it because in some ways there might be a way that if I do it just like this and just this way, uh, it somehow is going to, I don't know, change God, change reality, something like that. And it's sort of approaching in a world of separation at that point. It's not looking at everything always and everywhere true, but trying to create something specific, like like a magical kind of thing, where you're trying to hack nature and bring it all together to create some kind of movement in consciousness. Um, but nevertheless, even if people are approaching and doing rituals to repeat rituals for various reasons, including we've always done this, doesn't matter if we understand it or not, could that somehow, uh, be like generations placing bricks on a street and creating something throughout humanity that is like a road in this realm, that is that guides us
Mm,
or allows us to track towards a certain subjective aim as a huge macro concrescence.
mm.
I'm not even sure if I
Yeah.
stated my question right, but I guess I'm
I,
just.
I think I think I understand what you're trying to get at here. I mean, among all the other functions ritual might perform, it's one of them is collective entrainment of our consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for generations and generations, every Sunday, people and
Yeah.
communities would engage in these rituals, and it brings us out of ourselves. Um, and that alone, I think, is of tremendous value and serves a function that nowadays we would think of in terms of mental health. it,
Yeah.
it
Sure.
it keeps us feeling connected.
Yeah.
Um, just and to give it a totally secular
Yeah.
sort of description, but I think at a deeper level, the issue is that our conscious as conscious beings, what our consciousness is doing is selecting from the infinite vastness uh, of experience some narrow focal domain
Mm-hmm.
that that we attend to, and very often that's how am I feeling right now? Is my family safe? I'm hungry. I have this thing due at work tomorrow. Blah blah blah. Very personal level that our consciousness is um, tends to be focused on, and we ignore everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And the function of ritual in this sense is to remind us and to rebind us in the sense of religare to everything we've forgotten, to the forgotten ground of our existence. Um, and it is a way of participating in the divine nature and raising into our consciousness what Whitehead would call the consequent nature of God,
Yeah.
which expands the focal point of consciousness to include the entire history of the universe.
Right.
Um, and if we don't have ritual means of connecting with that bigger picture,
Mm-hmm.
then we're cut off and lost in our little abstract view of the world. We're stuck in misplaced concreteness. And so, but the issue becomes when religion and ritual and prayer start to function uh when we're still in our private little sense of this is my life and this is what matters to me and this is what I'm focused on, and we pray to God to help us personally, uh we start to imagine God as some kind of a omnipotent being that contends force for force or against forces in the natural world and can
Yeah.
like intervene and make things happen. And at least in Whitehead's cosmology, that's not how God operates. Um, God can't reach in, angels can't reach in and redirect the course of a bullet, you know,
Right.
um, because God's not separate from nature.
Okay, but right there is a good question: is if people are creating a god that is a being, because they have the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, do things like egregores?
Mm.
I mean, where would, I mean, I know Steiner and these others esotericas, they would have a place for that. Where might be a kind of creation that a lot of this misplaced concreteness, does it have an end that begins to, like an egregore? Is something like that even possible in Whitehead? Or what would you say?
I think I think the way to understand that is that conscious organisms such as human beings can uh, animate what would otherwise be abstract entities. And if there's a kind of collective projection onto what is in fact a kind of abstraction, that abstraction feeds back onto us. And we see this all the time in the public relations world in terms of branding and advertising.
Yeah,
Corporate brands are egregores,
sure.
and they where is that egregore? What's inside of each of us? um, the monetary system, money is a kind
Mhm.
of egregore that we think has this agency. Economists talk about the flow of money as if it's some kind of independent, self-organizing
The hidden
system.
hand. Yeah.
Yeah, the invisible hand. And they'll say, well, that's just a metaphor. But uh, I think we think of this not as just a metaphor because we think economics is a positive science. It has equations and it has models, and we we relate to these abstract forces as agents, and that's very disempowering. Um, and
To
we
us.
forget to us, to human
Yeah.
beings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think it's it's a real difficult transformation for people to make, to move from this idea of of God as a being that you might petition
Right.
uh, to help you, to the idea which I think is actually at the core of what I understand
Hmm.
Christianity to be about, is that God is God has become a human being to be imitated.
Hmm.
God is not a omnipotent um, sky pharaoh to be feared, and that you want to stay on the good side so that he protects you from the bad guys. It's like it's a much greater challenge than that to fall to imitate Christ. Um, you don't get to avoid the pain and the suffering. In fact, that's part of what's required for you to have freedom and for love to be possible, is that there's pain and suffering and indeed crucifixion, and
To the
so
point of being able to be thankful, even as one, the paradox of being grateful, even as one is undergoing suffering, not in a masochistic way, but if one does the dying and rising and dying and rising enough, one learns to just live in liminal space, the threshold between the two, because even our risings at some point are going to become the new dying. Um, so
mhm,
even that, we can be grateful, which is what the Eucharist means. It means,
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
always, it's a broken piece of bread, and then we're saying thank you. It's interesting.
yeah. I mean, you were speaking earlier to the way that Christianity has borrowed some rituals and
Yeah.
symbols and whatnot from earlier traditions, and there's a difference between appropriation and appreciation
Mm,
that's, I think, subtle. But I think in the case of the Eucharist, yeah, we're talking about an ancient pagan fertility
yeah.
rite uh, that has been transposed into a Christian context. And that kind of continuity is so important because what we don't want to end up with, I think, in this effort to gesture towards a metamodern Christianity, or metamodern spirituality more generally, is something that's
Mm,
parochial and narrow and limited to one particular religious perspective. Now, this is super hard to articulate in a way that is truly inclusive, but I think um, when we look at the history of humanity, and there's these certain beings, which maybe they were historical, like actual flesh and blood beings. I think in the case of Jesus, there's a lot of evidence that, yeah, he walked the earth. But then there's Zoroaster,
mhm.
there's Siddhartha Gautama, Buddha. There's um, we can think of Krishna as maybe more of an avatar. Um, but if we can, as a human community, inherit the deeds and teachings of these beings without the need for any kind of uh, uh, exclusivism that like, well, no, my religion's better than your religion, and I don't believe in any of that stuff about Buddha and Krishna and whatever. All we need is the Bible, but instead see that actually the only way to understand the Bible is to put it in the context of the Babylonian myths that came before
Yeah.
and it informed the, the Hebrew poets and priests that wrote that book, um, and on, all the way back to, the first cave paintings and ritual dances around the fire. Like this is one continuous evolution of consciousness, and
Yes.
every religious tradition the planet over has a contribution to make, right? And so the implication then is uh, the teachings of Buddha are relevant to everybody.
Yeah.
The teachings of Jesus are relevant to everybody, but also the Christ event and the kind of transformation which occurred is relevant to everybody. And it's not about becoming a Christian. It's about being part of a collective evolutionary process.
Now, right there, what would be, see, this, I'm sorry, I'm snotting everywhere. You see, you've got me so worked up. I'm just
That's okay.
bring out the best in me here, Matt. Um, Here's what I want to say to that, because this hits right at the bottom level of metamodern Christianity, as far as I see it, is if it's a universal thing that affects us all, then what would be the embodied response to such an event? In other words, um, the Christ event as coming a face to face with some kind, I mean, almost like a new, like a big bang of love, just epicenter blowing through, and that it wasn't, doesn't belong to just Christianity, but the Christ, I almost want to change the term Christ because it's so loaded, but let's say it's logos anity or something.
Mhm.
But well, if we're looking at the wisdom that leads up to this epicenter from all of the world's religions, from the earliest on to that point, um, we have to say that it's a event that invites us to see that we are participants, that reality is relational and participative right here, and it's in that the cutting edge of God's knowledge about God's self is immediate right here in this particular bandwidth. This materiality is the cutting edge of God's knowing. And so if how does this make us look? How is that? What is a response that we humans are invited into to participate in that? What would a person look like if they were fully aware of the divinity of their actions all of a sudden? If everything is whole, how does wholeness look on this side of the veil that we're stewarding the wholeness? If everything is perceptive bonds that holds the world in solidarity, um, almost as something belonging to superjects, but also an eternal object that wants to ingress to this perceptive bonds. But like it's like our job to actualize the perceptive bonds through our actions in some kind of way. Huh? So, what would that look like in your opinion?
Well, on the one hand, I think human beings would take responsibility for their freedom, but the paradox would be that the actualization of that freedom is actually an act of renunciation,
It's exactly
right?
what I think too. Yeah.
Yeah. Or sacrifice. Like, what is what is your life for? Like, what is my life for? It's not actually for me.
To be free to do what? Yeah. To be what? Yeah. Mm.
To be and become love.
That's it.
And that is always going to be a self-sacrificial deed. But the paradox is that that's what we all really want.
I know. Isn't that funny? Isn't that is what we're all wanting, all of us.
Yeah.
It's the great ache.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And as you were saying earlier, it's like we have rituals, we have sacred architecture and certain places and times where we engage in these practices to remember this. And there's always going to be, at least there always has been in human history across cultures, a sacred profane kind of, or let's say sacred secular kind of uh, distinction. And so, can we sanctify all of life? Maybe that's the goal.
I think
Um,
so.
but we're evolving towards that. And I think
Yes.
we're we still have these, as Blake would say, these vegetable bodies or these animal bodies, um, and there's been a kind of a fall of sorts, which has both made this evolutionary task more difficult, but also uh, really increased the potential of what's possible. Without the fall, there's no freedom. And if
Yeah.
if the whole process just unfolded automatically, as if according to a plan, divine plan, then nothing new is really achieved. And so I think there will we need to be forgiving of ourselves for failing to sanctify all of life all the time, and yet also continually strive. I mean, the spiritual path seems to me to be uh, all about every day becoming a little bit more uh, capable of living from that self-sacrificial uh, place where we're able to just be love.
Mm.
It's not so much
Embodied love.
be embodied love, and everyone knows how powerful love is, and we have these more personal forms of love that
Hmm.
knit our relationships, our families, our communities together, and that needs to continue to expand and grow beyond just the blood bonds.
Yeah.
um, which is why one of the most there are a lot of difficult sayings in the gospels, but when Jesus says like only those who hate their families can follow
Yeah.
me, it's like, whoa, what are you saying? This isn't family values. What's going on here? But it's a parable to suggest that you need to be able to love not abstractly, but fully, uh, everyone, and not just every. I think Jesus would go beyond just this loving human beings, but like love the world, um, and see that if we remain narrow in our affections, the wars will never stop, because that kind of you know mama bear type of love, like I'm gonna protect
Hmm.
me and mine from the bad guys out there, perfectly natural instinct. But when blown up to the scale of a nation, has got us to the verge of World War III. And um, if we can't overcome that animal instinct,
Yeah.
we're in deep trouble.
Mm. Mm.
I don't think we get a third chance at this form of in-group, out-group, limited love with a lowercase l. We really need
Yeah.
to be able to transcend that, and the clock's ticking. And that's it's putting a lot of evolutionary pressure. There's a bottleneck right now
Hmm.
on human beings, um, and I don't think it wouldn't be we wouldn't be free if it were all going to work out in the end automatically.
Yeah.
Because we are free, I don't think there's any guarantees here.
Yeah.
So the stakes are high.
I'd like to re-sum what I think I'm hearing you say. So
Mhm.
much richness there. One of the things I heard you say was this idea of sacrifice, a holy self-sacrifice, that we can be free, but freedom to do what? And that is, in some ways, choose um, choose to die to our egoic desires of more power, more prestige, more possessions, this false self notion, to die to that, or at least refine it, the alchemical process of transformation, refining that. And so it's freedom to willingly die. That's the paradox I'm hearing you say. And in so doing, we not only open our eyes individually, but then become embodied models for saying, uh, this fleshiness, this earth that we have here, everything is holy. A gesture is holy, holy in that it's whole. Um, and now that I'm not trying to go after my own power and prestige and possessions, I'm standing under, in a sense, the view of standing under it all, and seeing how everything is rooted and connected, even if I go above the soil and everything seems to be really separate, you know. And I've often wondered if Whitehead's does, I know he didn't coin pan experientialism. Was that, who was that? David Ray Griffith or
Griffin, yeah.
Griffin? Sorry, yeah, pan experientialism. But I think I'm gonna try this sentence out with you and see if this makes sense. What if it's pan experientialism across, but with the emergence of the human, with self will, where we're trying to express our will inside a freedom inside of a desire to make more wholeness happen here. What if our job is to give God even more experience, but that is on this side of the veil, if you will, on this side of the fall, if we want to use that myth? It's to say everything is holy, everything is a sacrament, a conversation is a sacrament. In other words, if everything, as that Jesuit professor said, if it's always and everywhere true, then it should be acknowledged, enacted, embodied, and realized and celebrated in one moment, in one place. And can we arise to some level of awareness in our ordinary life to see that dish that I'm washing is a supreme holiness,
Mm.
uh, not just for the sake of, the atoms are holy and I'm holy and all this, but the very actualization of a, a service. Everything, the conversation you and I are having right now is holy if we can recognize it. And I almost think that to be able to have the faith, even if we don't feel it, the faith that things are holy, uh, when I'm doing a sacrifice of myself for my family or my tribe or something like that, if I'm sacrificing myself for my tribe so that we can beat the other tribe, that's not grasping or even attempting to grasp the universal holiness of it all and trying
Mm.
to bring holiness into the concrete moment. My sacrifice isn't pure in that sense. It's a sacrifice. I'm sacrificing myself, but it's so that the tribe that represents me in a larger way can win. But I'm wondering if our sacrificing, even if there were a World War III, and I hope there's not, but even if there were, and even if there are on some levels enemies that in some ways are acknowledged, um, can we move, like right now when I'm thinking of my political opponents, of which there are, I'm sure you can too, people on the other side or something, like this is a good exercise for all of us, is how can I hold them in a level of supreme holiness? How can I hold myself together with that? And even the conflicts that we might have with each other in the way we understand reality and the way we want to have reality look, that in and of itself is a part of this grander wholeness making that may or may not include us. We're contributing to some kind of growth in the universe, even if it's learning not to do that again or something,
Mhm.
And I know that's nihilistic in some ways, but I'm hoping it's ultimately optimistic, that we're all, if we can grasp the holiness of it all, and then inside of that meta piece, I desire to serve everybody for the highest and greatest good, including my enemies, including myself, everything. And then inside that, do maybe some sacrifices for individual people and tribes or whatever, always keeping in mind this transcendent layer of all belonging in unity. I don't know. Can you feel the subtlety there? What do you think about that?
Hmm. Well, I mean, this has been coming up a bit in the Metamodern Spirituality Facebook group, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the Christianity one too, but the political issues now
Mm.
and people wanting to be able to talk about spirituality and religion without muddying the waters with all of this political
Yeah.
discord and and ill will and othering that's going on right now. And I think it's impossible to avoid. And you know, the role of the adversary is essential. Judas is so core to the story of Jesus and the crucifixion um, and evolution requires resistance. Otherwise, there can be no growth and no transformation. Um, and I am still on the journey with this, but I try to relate to political opponents with empathy and to try to understand why do they hold the positions that they do? What has their life experience been such that they would make that argument or propose such a policy or be blind to what I perceive to be the suffering of the people who would be affected by that. How come they can't
Hmm.
see that? What am I not seeing that they do see? And just continually questioning that. But there's a shift happening right now, I think, in the liberal democracies, um, and we both know it. I think most intimately here in the U.S., where we're really in a post-liberal
Yeah.
era, and there's this pretty well known on the left and the right among scholars Nazi jurist and legal theorist named Carl Schmitt, and he
Hmm.
defined politics as you know that domain wherein we distinguish between friends and enemies, and everything becomes a power play at that point. Are you with me or are you against me? And liberalism had traditionally been framed as, well, no, we don't think of uh, politics as just a uh, power struggle between friends and enemies. We have a rational order. We call it the legal system, and law and politics are separate. Whereas Schmidt would say this liberal idea that law is somehow universal and that human beings could just rationally agree and debate things without that raw power impulse being underneath the surface is kind of naive and silly. Um, and we can reject his fascist politics, of course, but as a political theory, it's hard to deny that that seems to be how things are functioning at this point. And law has been politicized. And was it ever not political?
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh, and so, what do we do in this situation? Well, I think the liberal idea that reason or rationality or science and technology or whatever could be the unifying sort of source of our agreement about how to organize society, that's not going to work. Human beings are not just rational actors. And so either we can, I mean, and the thing is, Schmidt uh, was a Catholic, but not one who I think was hearing the teachings of Christ uh, clearly
Catholic
enough.
without Jesus.
I guess so. Um, he certainly wasn't turning the other cheek. Um, but I think we need something more than this disembodied ahistorical rationality to organize our societies. And so that liberal ideal uh, isn't functioning anymore. And so, how do we avoid politics then um, dropping down to the lower chakras? We need to rise.
Oh, this
Uh,
is so key. I'm so glad we're talking. This is precisely it. You
yeah,
you have just got to the very nexus of it. And so I'm going to invoke your imagination and I'm going to offer my own idea. How do you think we do that? What does it look like in your personal life? Or you don't be, don't disclose to everything, I guess, but what does this look like?
Well, I don't know that I always do a great job in the dumpster fire of social media at not engaging with political opponents in a constructive way. I mean, I try to be dialogical and not accusatory, but it's
I
hard.
think you're invitational. You
Yeah.
invite people to comment, but you don't shy away of being bold when you need to be bold. But it's not a malicious boldness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I've seen you out there.
Yeah. And I've gone on and I'm still on my own journey with this. None of this is easy because politics requires often taking moral stances. It requires being for or against different policy proposals, which, if we're honest with ourselves, none of us know how a particular policy, um, if legislation were passed to enact that approach, whether it's in healthcare or prison reform or whatever it might be, we don't know how it's going to actually, what the consequences of it will actually be. The world is very complex. People are not just, uh, you know, machines that follow simple algorithms. You think, oh, this is how society seems to function right now. Then if we apply this policy, that'll fix the problem. No, people are going to start changing their behavior and in light of how they feel about this new policy. And all of a sudden, the situation you thought you were addressing has changed, and that proposal doesn't work anymore. So politics is hard. It's always going to be hard. But I think if we can't engage one another at a heart level, where yeah, we need to employ our rational minds and draw on science when it's relevant. Um, and sometimes the protective instinct is important too. Like I'm not a pacifist. I think there are just wars, you
I
know.
I would agree with you on that. Yeah,
I don't know that there are any
reluctantly,
just
but
wars
I
right
yeah
now going
no
on, but
yeah.
but there is such a thing as a just war.
Mm,
But the center of gravity needs to be the heart, and that means being able to meet people not as abstractions like, oh, that's a Republican, or oh,
yeah.
that's a Democrat, or that's a leftist, that's a right wing, whatever, but to really be able to meet people. And I've had dinner with very conservative people, uh, which different circumstances brought me into that type of situation, and I I really enjoy those types of conversations, and I think I'm pretty good at not getting triggered and at not triggering others. It's very
So right
delicate.
there, this will be important for people. How do you do that inside? See,
Mm,
that's important to talk about because you know when you're hearing something, that could be your temperament allows you to do that. But what's happening inside you is you're hearing something and you're holding it. There's a spaciousness, you're holding it. You're thinking goodwill or there's something going on so you can hold it, not be triggered and respond, not react. Can you describe what's going on inside right there?
I think it's about connecting with the suffering of the other and
There you go.
recognizing we're all suffering,
Yeah,
and
that's it.
our politics, our political ideology is downstream of our life experience and um, the traumas that we have encountered, the
Mm,
difficulties that we've had to um, respond to and overcome, and so you need to learn someone's story. And I think if we just immediately jump into the debates about political questions and we don't actually meet each other as people with stories, biographies, and understand the suffering behind the scenes, as it were, or beneath these political opinions, then we're never going to get anywhere. There's a lot of fear, and so there's pain and suffering, there's fear, and there's anger. And we talked about this in earlier
yeah,
sessions, how that
yeah.
operates below the surface, and you can understand that in a deep esoteric way, and you can understand that
Yep.
in a psychological way. Um, and both are important. And as you were saying, the exoteric and the esoteric are
Mhm.
intimately related and need to be translatable one to the other.
Yeah.
Um, but just meeting as suffering creatures, I think, is the key for me.
I'd like to just put an exclamation point on what you just said, and I think this is actually how we do it. What you've just said is Christian, but it's also as perennial as possible. And you're saying you're locating your, if I could translate what you're saying, is you're locating your experience and your the contrasts that have emerged in your life, the moments of suffering, um, that haven't killed you, but have allowed you to enjoy a certain level of metanoia and spaciousness for yourself. You're locating that experience at the heart of the experience of somebody else and seeing them from this lens of both compassion and understanding. And then that creates the energy of a dialogue, of facilitating a dialogos, I'm not, because it might happen to you fairly naturally given who you are, and your experiences. That's a skill that needs to be that's what I work on. I try to help people, um, make that feeling of tension when I'm receiving something, uh, that triggers me, feel the trigger, create the space. I mean, there's a way to teach this psychologically and esoterically. I'll, in that spaciousness, then decide how I'm going to respond. And automatically, there's almost three levels of suppositions or assumptions you're making when you're able to do that. I think it's one is we're all somehow connected. There's like a, um, a primordial connection that even if I've never met somebody before, we're somehow in this together. So I'm granting our interconnectedness, but it's even though it's real, it's not actualized until I form a relationship in some ways, you know. So then that's the second thing, is my job as a worker in this field is to actualize that which is always and everywhere true, our interconnectedness. But the way I actualize that has to be, um, precisely my ability to feel and have self-awareness, feel my own places of brokenness and dis entanglement, um, places of separation inside of me, without hating it and holding it. And I'm on the path, and I'm granting then the other person to be on the path too. And this is hard. It's hard to be human, but it's precisely the difficulty and struggle is the great beauty, in a sense, right? This is how it all grows. But you're doing that automatically, which allows you, uh, to go and eat dinner with some very conservative people and emerge from that, I'm assuming, with enthusiasm, with that energy. And they probably felt that way too. That's a high skill, but that's precisely, I think, what we have to, well, I mean, those who feel called to, and you do it in your own way, and Brandon does it, and I try to do it, and others, but to help people receive external catalysts, process them internally, hold the space, whatever forgiveness needs to happen, then engage at a level that, loves the dignity, loves the other person, even if the other person doesn't recognize their own beauty. What do you think about what I'm saying?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I think we need to go into this with a lot of humility, because it's, even if we were to enter into politics from a heart-centered place and be super compassionate for our political opponents,
Mm,
it's still going to be, as you're saying, very hard work. And in the case of some of these conversations I've had, one time it was with a economics professor, actually, at a community college, who was one of a few conservative, if not the only conservative voice in his school. And the topics we discussed were, I think, relatively easy ones in comparison to some of the things we could have gotten into, but it was evolution and climate change. And I did not succeed after 2 hours in convincing him that climate change is an issue, or that he should believe in evolution.
Hmm.
I think that's not quite the right word, but what did happen is that he came. I think he came to understand that there are more than two options in both of these issues. It's not either uh, we're just, animals and morality is a farce, and it's just, um, there's no God, there's no greater meaning. It's just matter and motion that happen to get complicated enough to reproduce or whatever. There's other ways of understanding evolution, and there are ways that evolution can be compatible with a religious view. And this guy was Christian.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I was talking about Teilhard de Chardin, and like there are other ways of understanding what creation is that could be evolutionary, and we can see evolution as purposeful, etc. He wasn't, all of a sudden an evolutionist or a Teilhardian, but he saw, oh, okay, there's another perspective here, and not all progressives are just rushing to say that um, we're just animals. And I think we are animals, but we're also continuing on the evolutionary journey into a different kind of being that's not merely animal. And then with climate change, similarly, there's a third way here, which is that, his point was, well, the climate's changed before human beings were ever here. And yes, it has. And there's a certain naive view, among some progressives that think, oh, if only we could stop producing greenhouse gases, then everything would be fine and nature could go back to being a steady state. The Earth's never been a steady state
Yeah.
system. There have been many mass extinctions before. On some level, evolution is a cascading series of catastrophes,
Hmm.
and so just because we get our act together as human beings doesn't mean that all of a sudden nature becomes rainbows and unicorns, and we're always going to have to deal with the issues of the instability of the ecosystems that we exist within and as part of. And there could be an asteroid impact. There's so many ways that things get
As long as
destabilized.
it hits California first. Just
Yeah. So,
how's
the
that for
point
being
is,
Christian? Okay.
right. The point is, in these conversations, we shouldn't expect just,
No.
approaching it from a heart-centered way that we're all going to agree on everything, but we can at least accept that this binary opposition between two extreme positions is actually an abstraction, and most people are not on one side or the other of these extremes that the media propagates to sell ads.
And then what would you say are primary reasons why we might choose to be so polarized and even going on YouTube and defending a particular space? If we're not in practice so binary, but our way to need to be to express our opinion is binary, then there's got to be a reason why we're holding on to that.
Virtue
And
signaling. We want to be part of the in group.
we do. And what's below that? A desire to, because what happens if we're not a part of the in group? Excommunication is the worst fear humans have ever
Yeah.
had. Like, it's
Yeah.
way worse than killing you.
Yeah.
It's getting outside of the community and you're gone. That's the worst thing. That's that shame of I'm unworthy of love and belonging. That is the fundament for me. That below fear, I'm sorry, above fear, but so fear for me is the basis. But right above that is that shame, and
Mm.
every single person has that. I don't care who you are, unless you're psychopath, because they kind of don't. Because you have to have empathy to feel some level of shame.
Yeah.
But you know, uh, when you're talking to that guy, like as a counselor, if I were to watch, and I've seen you with David Long. I mean, this was what 4 years ago when you did that. I'm sure that you look back and think, well, I could have said it differently. Or if you're like
Mhm.
me, you would second guess yourself. Maybe you're much
Sure.
healthier than me. But what I would say is, if I were to watch you have a conversation with this guy, this economist, what I could probably sense in you that would be automatic is receiving this, holding him with dignity, um, valuing the opposition. I mean, you got to you valued it. This Carl Schmitt. I mean, it's
Mhm.
okay to have that. This is the the law of three. You got to have contrast, and but if you hold it with the dignity and sacredness that it deserves, then I think it allows us to engage with the other person right at that level of inherent humanity and desire to belong, the anxiety. He might go home and have some real anxiety about life.
Mm.
Uh, I know I do. And can we connect with the fact that it's difficult to be here? You probably did that all automatically. This is you didn't even have to go that deep because this is a muscle you've built through your own suffering. You see, what I'm trying to say is that that muscle that you've built that's strong at this point in your life is a muscle that a lot of us don't have. We either don't know it exists or it's not very strong. So I think a meta modern Christianity, this is, I guess, to tie it all back, a meta modern Christianity is one that recognizes the inherent sacredness of the embodied universe.
Mm.
It recognizes the inherent sacredness of the transcendent layer that is desiring to become embodied, to incarnate, wholeness, wanting to break into our life and then become actualized. And it's meta modern Christianity is one that stands inside, in solidarity, in the world of actualization, and recognizes the dignity, the process, and how difficult it is to put it all together in the other person, because it is with me, and I know it's with you. And can we, even if we don't have to say it, can we give each other the energy of you belong, I belong, we belong together?
Mm.
Like if we can, a meta modern Christian, I think, therefore fosters that in however they can, fosters that energetics of belonging from the bottom, from our fear, shame, uh, and anger and reasons for that, acknowledging them, we're in this together, and then building on all of the things that we hope for, our subjective aims together. That's a meta modern Christian for me, is that it creates, that person creates the space for that kind of energetics to be felt, received, and given.
Mm.
What do
Mhm.
you think?
Yeah, it's I think graduating from a childish relationship to God to a mature relationship where, you know, um, it's a natural developmental stage to go through these this sort of temper tantrum mentality where you want to force the world to be a certain way
Yes.
because you're egocentric, um, to a place where actually, um, in the political arena, to the extent that we're trying to force others to be a certain way, um, we're failing actually. And it's more about persuasion. And this is what liberalism gets right,
Mhm.
but it can't just be rational persuasion.
No.
We've
The
got to
gut
be,
has to be felt.
yeah, yeah. And so, um, force is something that I think both the progressive left and the conservative right, in their own ways, are still engaging in politics as this power play, and they want to force the other side to do this or that. And obviously, there are some limits. We have a state and a government and police and military and so on, because there's certain lines that we don't want crossed. And
Yeah.
sometimes, like I said, I'm not a pacifist, but at the same time, what direction are we trying to head in as a society? I
Mhm.
would say we want to move away from force towards persuasion and love as the primary mode in which we interact. And we're rushing headlong in the wrong direction. And if religion and spirituality have any role to play in politics, I would hope it's not to increase our hatred and desire to use force to get our problem solved, because that's not actually, that's A, it's not going to help, and B, it's about as far from the teachings of Jesus Christ as I could imagine, right? And so what
Yeah.
has gone wrong with contemporary American Christianity that it would seek something like a Christian nationalism that's so obviously, baldly on its face, idolatrous? It should be a moment for deep reckoning and self-inquiry. Uh,
Mm.
and it's, I will admit it's very difficult given the level of militarization and radicalization to have a conversation, because I hope we haven't passed the point where conversation isn't possible, because things are getting really rough out there. But I do have faith, and I think there's a longer arc to this process that will continue long after you and I are both dead. And so we have to keep the long game in mind. And even if all we can do is tend soil right now and plant some seeds, um, that has meaning for the future, and I
Do
do
so with
think,
joy, not just, not just
right,
the fear,
right.
but the joy, because we feel it, the integration on the inside.
Mhm,
I
mhm,
think that force is, and I know we need to finish here soon, but I just want to say it this way, that force, understood maybe as power or the force. I think what we've done is try to make Christianity of the force of the lower chakras. It's this constant self, trying to figure out self between community, uh, who am I, between a community and fighting and tribes, and all of that belongs in the purview of this almost a closed feedback loop of the lower chakra triad. That's force in that sense. But we need people who are wearing green shirts, but energetically,
mhm,
this green heart, open ray understanding of using force to force us, if you will, but not in a manipulative way, persuasive. But all the energy, all the force, if I could say it like power, force, strength, force into forcing myself to look at your humanity, because I have seen my humanity in all of its goodness, in all of its brokenness, in all of its difficulty and suffering in places that I don't even know yet. But can I be humble on that? If I can be self-aware, grant you that, and then from that we can talk, and that's going to be at the level of the green ray and higher. But it's using persuasion, it's using all that force, but it's forcing myself, even if I'm really disagreeing with somebody on the other side, I'm going to force myself to look at myself where I might have believed what they believed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and I went on a journey. And can I see that I'm full of contradictions and force myself to admit that, and then receive the other person who else is also on a journey? I think that's the beginning of green ray conversation and persuasion, as you say.
mhm. Yeah, I like that. Mhm.
Well, thank you. This has been wonderful. I appreciate your dialogues a lot.
Yeah, likewise, Doug. I think we hit our stride here, and hopefully said something valuable. And I guess you and Brendan recorded a conversation that will be out at some point
No, we,
soon.
we
Oh,
decided to record something coming up in about a month or something. I'm looking
oh,
forward to
okay.
it. We had a
Cool.
preliminary meeting just to kind of chit chat and
Gotcha.
yeah.
Cool. Well, I look forward to seeing that. And yeah, hopefully this will spark some conversation among the Metamodern crew as well and others. So
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
awesome. Well, thank you, and we'll stay in touch. And I
definitely.
appreciate dancing with you, walking with you.
Yeah, likewise. Keep up the good
All right.
work, Doug.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.